what each business function should watch heading into Q2 2026. Most quarterly outlooks try to cover everything at once. The result is usually the same: broad, safe, and easy to ignore. That's not where things stand right now. Heading into Q2 2026, the environment isn't defined by one dominant shift. It's the accumulation of smaller changes that have started to show up in real decisions. Boards are asking more pointed questions. Facilities teams are dealing with constraints they can't plan around. Compliance timelines are tightening. Procurement teams are getting pulled deeper into emissions data. And IT is starting to feel the energy impact of its own growth. In January, most of this still felt manageable. Now it's showing up in budgets, reporting, and operations. For the C-suite, disclosure is starting to affect capital conversations. At a high level, the narrative hasn't changed much since the start of the year. What has changed is how specific it's become. What used to be framed as coming pressure is now showing up in investor questions, lender conversations, and internal reporting cycles. That shift matters. Disclosure quality is no longer just a governance issue. It's starting to influence how organizations are perceived from a capital and credibility standpoint. This is where some companies are starting to feel friction. The ones moving cleanly through Q1 had alignment between finance, legal, sustainability, and operations. Everyone was working from the same view of risk. The ones struggling are still fragmented, different teams holding different pieces of the picture, with no clear line of sight across them. Heading into Q2, the priority isn't more monitoring. It's getting those functions aligned before mid-year reporting and capital planning force reactive decisions. For facilities and energy teams, resilience is now the priority. The grid didn't stabilize in Q1. In a lot of places, it got harder to navigate. Congestion, curtailment, and demand response events are no longer occasional disruptions. They're part of normal operations. That's changing how facilities teams are thinking about capital. Efficiency still matters, but resilience is moving ahead of it. Organizations that held off on on-site generation, storage, or distributed energy projects are starting to revisit those decisions. Not because the sustainability case improved, but because the operational risk is harder to ignore. Energy costs, demand charges, and reliability exposure are all pointing in the same direction. The window to act while financing and incentives still support these projects is still open, but it's narrowing. At the same time, building performance standards are tightening across multiple states. For older assets, that creates a second layer of pressure: compliance risk tied directly to capital planning. For EHS and compliance teams, water is the issue, catching people off guard. Enforcement isn't easing. If anything, it's becoming more precise. What stood out in Q1 wasn't just activity, it was how quickly issues moved once identified. Documentation gaps, permit misalignment, and operational inconsistencies are being picked up faster and pushed further. Water is where this is starting to concentrate. This isn't about one regulation, it's the overlap: quality standards, discharge requirements, usage scrutiny, and reporting expectations all tightening at once. For operators with aging infrastructure or fragmented oversight, that combination creates exposure that's easy to underestimate until it's too late. A current state review of water compliance is one of the more practical moves organizations can make in Q2. It's not complicated, but it does surface issues before they turn into enforcement actions. For procurement and supply chain leaders, emissions are becoming a contract issue. Scope 3 isn't just sitting in sustainability reports anymore. Procurement teams are getting pulled into it directly through supplier requests, data requirements, and in some cases, contract language. What started as disclosure is turning into verification, and in some cases, negotiation. Not every supplier carries the same weight. That's where teams are starting to adjust. The more effective approach now is targeted. Focus deeper engagement on suppliers that are both emissions intensive and commercially critical. Treat the rest differently. Trying to apply the same level of scrutiny across the board isn't holding up. At the same time, energy price exposure is still unresolved. Q1 was a reminder that fixed assumptions don't stay fixed for long. If there's flexibility in existing contracts, electricity, gas, or otherwise, this is the window to revisit them. Waiting introduces risk that doesn't need to be there. For technology and digital operations leaders, energy use is no longer abstract. The energy footprint of digital infrastructure is becoming visible in a way it wasn't even a year ago. As AI workloads scale, data center demand is showing up in corporate energy profiles more clearly, and sometimes unexpectedly. What used to be treated as an IT capacity issue is now intersecting with emissions tracking, cost management, and executive oversight. That's starting to draw attention. Sustainability teams want better data. Leadership wants to understand the implications. And in some organizations, those conversations are happening for the first time without a clear baseline. Cooling is part of this too. Higher compute density is driving more cooling demand, and in some cases, increased water use. That pulls digital operations into the same resource conversations facilities and compliance teams are already having. If those connections aren't being made internally yet, they will be. The real Q2 signal is that delay is getting harder to justify. Across functions, the pattern is starting to look the same. The issues that felt deferrable in January are now showing up in ways that are harder to push off. Regulatory timelines are tightening. Market conditions haven't stabilized. Operational constraints are still there. And expectations from investors, customers, and regulators are not easing. The organizations that move cleanly through Q2 won't necessarily be the ones with the most ambitious strategies. They'll be the ones that close the gap between what they already know and what they're actually doing about it. That's the difference this quarter is starting to expose. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites by Environment and Energy Leader. For partnership opportunities, please reach out to our team.